Welcome everyone to the webinar. I'm Chris Ventura, the CEO of Harness Projects. So for those of you joining for the first time, Harness Projects is an education provider teaching UX design skills. Our courses follow a real project learning model where our students basically work on live company challenges while we train them. And we pride ourselves on being the only provider that helps students gain skills and experience all in the one course. Our next Career Launcher UX design course is going to commence on the 14th of August for Australian students and the 11th of September for US students. Now, this 6-month course has been designed to include 3 real-world company projects to help our students gain the skills and experience they need to land their first UX/UI role. So we currently have a handful of places remaining in each of these US and Australian-based cohorts. So if you're interested in getting involved after today's webinar, or really just to have a chat about your UX/UI goals, please get in touch either via our website or through a link in the chat, which I'll be posting shortly. But I wanted to kick things off with welcoming our 2 panelists for the webinar today, both of whom will be mentoring in our next UX courses as well, each in their respective countries. Warner and Chad are leading UX in some of the world's most well-renowned tech firms. So first, I'd like to welcome Warner Wong. He's a senior UX researcher at Canva Australia. Welcome, Warner.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Okay, let me just share my screen.
So just as Warner does that, just to give everyone a bit of context, we are going to have some short presentations. So Warner will be presenting, so will Chad shortly after, just to give you all a bit of background on their UX career and how they made their transition into UX/UI, as well as some tips and advice that might be helpful for all of you who are going on that journey. We're going to have time for questions at the end of the session. So please hang around and use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions, just so I don't miss them. And we're going to get to as many as we can in the time that we have available. You can upvote questions. So if you see one that that resonates with you, just upvote it so we can get a sense of what's more important for everyone in the audience. But with that said, I'll hand over to Warner for the first presentation. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Okay, well, hi, folks. My name is Warner Wong, and currently I'm a senior UX researcher at Canva. So we are, a tech-based company based in Sydney, but we are quite global for those who haven't heard of Canva. Okay, so today I'm just going to spend about 10, 15 minutes talking through kind of like what my journey was when I transitioned a little over a decade ago into the tech field from construction or architecture specifically. So I am a fellow transitioner like yourself, so I can definitely empathize with, the positions or the thoughts that you're probably going through in your head. And I'll be going through, some of the tips, some of the kind of like advice, and maybe like some of the pitfalls to watch out for throughout your transition journeys. Okay, so just to start off with a little bit about myself. Okay, so like I said, I started off not in tech, so a little over a decade ago. It's almost like a previous life, actually. I was an architect based in Australia. So I did that about, close to a decade, 8 to 9 years. So it's something that I, loved doing at the start, but kind of toward the end of that period, I kind of became a little bit kind of disillusioned. I was more like a project architect as opposed to a design architect. And in terms of the kind of work I was doing, there wasn't much, if at all, kind of user-centric kind of thinking to the architecture that I was involved in. Even those aspects of the project that I did enjoy, unless you kind of specialize as like an accessibility consultant or something like that, you really kind of put the needs of the user, like secondary compared to the actual structure itself, like trying to get the building done and, being designed in a particular way, which is ironic because it should be very much user-centric, but in certain fields of architecture, that isn't the case. So that was a little bit disillusioning. And personally, just as a person, I've always just been more interested in people as opposed to just things. Even, ironic, coming from an architect, I do like, obviously designing the actual objects, but what really fascinated me was about how users, use the buildings and use the actual object. So I guess I was in a period when I was thinking of transitioning and thinking of, what could I move into? Things popped up like project management or even psychology. But then an ex-architect colleague actually had a catch up with me, and she had made the leap into not so much UX but into tech as an engineer. So, but she obviously knew a lot about user experience because she works with them all the time. And we had a chat, and she kind of like recommended it would be a great fit in terms of all the transferable skills that I can bring, even more so than engineering. So she really made a big leap, whereas, she felt the jump to UX was a lot more natural. And I know for a fact that there's like an army of architects who have transitioned into UX design because it is quite a natural fit. I kind of like make the leap. I signed up to a boot course. Harness wasn't around then, so that wasn't an option, Chris. So I would have signed up otherwise. This was quite a while back. And I kind of made that transition from that point on and kind of didn't look back. So I had a couple of roles at a couple of, there was an agency and moved into enterprise before making the, you can say, slightly crazy decision to start my own agency with a few colleagues that I worked with at the agency. And that's still running, by the way. It's called We Discover, in case anyone's interested. And I ran that for as a co-founder for about 7 years. I kind of headed up the research kind of pillar of that particular business because that's where I kind of like fell into. I started as a UX designer and I love doing that, and I still do. It's just I kind of like, like I said, I'm much more fascinated by people and their behaviors and psychology, and research just kind of like was a natural fit to me. So I kind of fell into that kind of T and specialized in research based on that. But then just after a while of running the business, it's a bit of burnout, to be honest, and it was just less focus on the craft and more on running the business side of things. It kind of takes its toll. So I kind of made a decision, a couple of years back to go, what, I want to go back to actually doing the actual work, doing what I love and focus on that. So I exited that business and, like decided to join Canva as a UX researcher. And that's where I am right now. So that's just a little bit about my journey. Obviously, I've left out a lot of details, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a picture of how I kind of transitioned into where I'm currently. In terms of some of the transferable skills from my own personal opinion that I felt like I brought from architecture to, UX or to tech, the design aspect is probably the most obvious, architecture ultimately being a design discipline. So I found at first that the UI aspects of UX actually being a lot more natural, as it's about, you're placing elements in the correct way to make it aesthetically pleasing, color, font selections, all of that stuff came a lot more natural to me compared to maybe someone who doesn't have a design background. However, I actually found the actual, like I said, the actual people side, the user centricity side of UX a lot more fascinating. And that's where I really want to learn a lot more of and really deep dive into. But however, the actual UI elements of the design skills definitely came in handy when I was, starting to train myself up as a UX designer. But what I felt like was probably not as obvious when I made the transition was how applicable all the soft skills was that I had kind of, I guess gathered as an architect over the past decade. So when I was working as an architect, essentially as a project architect, that meant my day wasn't designing, like contrary to what a lot of people might feel about architects, we don't just sit at a drawing board or on the computer all day just designing. A lot of our time, 50% or more, is actually spent liaising with stakeholders, builders, engineers, consultants, the client, etc., solving design problems in a very collaborative fashion, and just dealing with an entire spectrum of different personalities and different agendas. So you learn to develop your soft skills actually quite a lot, which is super applicable to being a UX designer, which is something I didn't realize until I started working as a UX designer, because they're like, oh, actually, this is very familiar. It's a little bit deja vu, like different flavor, but essentially the same kind of like, like skill sets. So in your day-to-day, just as an FYI, as a UX designer, even as a UX researcher, there's a lot of stakeholder management that occurs, and all those soft skills definitely came in very handy. So for those of you who are thinking, well, I'm not a graphic designer, I didn't come from a design background, it's like, what can I bring to the table? If you're in any kind of role where you're being collaborative and you're managing stakeholders and dealing with lots of different types of personalities, gathering requirements, etc., all of that is highly transferable. So definitely use that to your advantage when you think about making this transition. So it's not just about the technical kind of creative skills. Some of you may have that, some of you may be graphic designers, etc. But a lot of you, I imagine, won't. So don't be too disillusioned that, oh, I'm not from a design role. There's guaranteed there's going to be something that you can bring to the table as well. Okay, so on that kind of vein of topic, like I've in the last decade or so, I've definitely seen a lot of career transitioners that jump into tech and into UX roles. And there's such a huge variety of different people who jump into UX, right? And just from my experience, from people that, even we've personally hired, here's just a few examples. And this is not an exhaustive list, by the way. So, psychology being a huge example, like UX research teams, they're chock full of, people who are psychology, trained. You can imagine they have a very deep understanding of human behavior. So it's very, very much applicable to things like research. And they don't even need to do any design, or even people from like social sciences and humanities. A lot of those skills and things that they learned at universities and whatnot is highly transferable. Like analysts, a lot of like analysts like BAs and stuff from, like enterprises like banks and telcos. I've seen a lot of them successfully make that switch into tech and UX. A lot of them had the advantage of already working within tech teams, right? So they're working in tech environments in an agile kind of format. So they've already been exposed to how a digital product gets made and shipped and launched and iterated on. So all those skills, even though they're not designers, are highly transferable because they kind of understand the ecosystem and how all the like cogs and kind of machinery kind of works behind what a digital product needs for it to be launched. What if you have neither? Like, what if you're not from a tech background? What if you're not from a design background? Something a bit left field. Let's say if you're from the trades, that's probably the furthest thing you can probably think of, right? And we definitely have seen people make that kind of transition. So even we at our agency, we personally did hire a girl. She worked at a mine for 10 years. She was in the mines, no tech, no design. But what was really evident was that she was pretty much a designer at heart. So she had all these kind of design side hustles that she would do. So she actually had a portfolio that she could show. And it was very evident that she had a really good natural eye for design. You could almost say like a talent for it. So it's not just like, oh yeah, we're just going to hire anyone from the mines. It's not like that. It's like, it doesn't matter who you are, especially as a junior, as a newbie, is the passion there, is the ability there, is that potential there. Then if that's there, then you definitely have that, I guess, potential to make that transition and make it easier on yourself as well. And don't forget that in tech, things progress rapidly. So in terms of upskilling, it's not going to take you 10 years to become a senior necessarily. Like back in architecture, that's how long it took us to become a senior. It takes about a decade of work experience, whereas in tech, it's a few years. It's a lot shorter. So even though you might not come from a design background, jumping into tech, if you know what you're doing and you're one of those guns, like you will make it very far very quickly. Okay, so however, there are some skills I had to kind of learn from scratch. So there definitely are the transferable skills, but then there are things I had to learn. One big thing is the processes, which is actually one of the great things I love about UX is the fact that there are these processes in place to help you design, in contrast to some other kind of design disciplines, which is a bit more abstract and a bit vague and a bit airy-fairy. Whereas in UX design, what I love is processes, and it gives you like a structured framework to kind of go about doing your things. You'll hear these terms once you dive in, like design thinking, jobs to be done, agile. They can get very buzzwordy, and they definitely have become this buzzwordy thing. But look beyond that. There's actually really practical and useful frameworks behind these kind of like methodologies and processes to help you really actually help you with the design process. And one of the great things about Harness is that we do actually teach you all these processes in a very practical way. So to go, okay, well, these are the use cases where you should be applying particular design thinking or jobs to be done processes, and actually applying them to real life client projects. So it's a very practical approach to design, which I love about UX design. The tools, of course, you got to learn the tools. Every different industry has the tools of the trade. Now it's all about Figma. Some of you might have heard of that already. And once again, Harness is great in that you'll actually learn how to use Figma in a very practical sense and actually use it to create real projects for real life clients. And I know for a fact that Figma training is lacking in some of the other boot camps options that are out there. Whereas Harness definitely does train you up on Figma to quite a detailed degree. A big adjustment for me personally was just learning how to work with software engineers. It actually did remind me a lot with working with the structural engineers and electrical engineers and builders from when I was an architect. So a bit of a deja vu there, but completely different skill set, obviously. I knew nothing about software. So a lot of people have asked me this, is like, well, do I need to learn how to code to become a UX designer? And the answer is no. But the caveat is, in my opinion, it doesn't hurt to have a bit of a foundational knowledge. The reason is not because you're going to code, but because you're going to be communicating all the time with these engineers. And it helps to have that foundational knowledge to at least be able to speak, or empathize with where they're coming from. So I know when I first started, I made a conscious effort. I'm not an engineer. I'm not the best coder, but I did make a conscious effort to learn basic HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript, just so that when I'm working with an engineer, I don't just sound completely silly and not really get where they're coming from. And, I know some of the best designers, actually know a bit of front-end engineering. And basically, the easier you make it for the engineers to write code for, they're going to love working with you, right? So, it's just much easier for collaboration, much easier for communication. Not compulsory, like I said. The reasoning is not because you need to code, it's because you have to be able to speak to engineers who do the coding, if that makes sense. Okay, so in terms of portfolios, I want to touch on this a bit. It's like, well, how did I build my portfolio and what advice would I give when it comes to building your portfolios? Personally, for my first portfolio, like I said, I did learn HTML, CSS. It was very difficult for me because that's not how my brain works, but I got there and I asked an engineer friend to kind of help me with some of the more tricky JavaScript interactions, even though very easy for them, but hard for me. So that was I actually built my first website. And I feel like anyone who asked me, should I build my first first portfolio as the document, okay, I would strongly suggest you actually build a website. And to be honest, with all these great easy website builders out there today, there really is no excuse because it's such a great showcase of your actual ability as a UX designer. If you think about it, you're a grad, you're a newbie, you don't have that network just yet, like some of the more senior people do. So your portfolio really is one of your main things that, or maybe the only thing you have to kind of show that first great impression. And, like being able to demonstrate that, like, this is how I UX design my portfolio is kind of like part of the portfolio, if that makes sense. So I'll strongly advise anyone who is going, thinking to go, website or not website, definitely I would personally say build a website because I guarantee you all these other people competing for the same roles in junior roles, etc., they're going to have a website to showcase their work. Also ask for feedback all the time. So it's quite easy to fall in the trap of falling in a silo and just working on your portfolio and not asking for any feedback. It becomes a bit of an echo chamber. I would highly advise that you ask for feedback, not just from your friends and family, but people who actually have some design knowledge, maybe from other designers or even from recruiters. Recruiters are actually fantastic because they look through so many portfolios all the time. So if you know someone who's a recruiter, get their feedback, or just anyone who's in tech, any friends and colleagues that you know in tech, get everyone's feedback. But in saying that, don't just make iterations because someone said this, someone said that, because then you'll be just going around in circles. So be very selective of like what changes you make. And don't overdo it. But that would be my suggestion. Okay, so what strategies did I use to kind of land my first role? So networking, I think it's like the most important out of these three. So network, network, network. First of all, because you probably don't have that network just yet. You have to start building that, right? And that's going to take time. That's why you got to start as early as possible to start networking, to meet the people who are in positions where they can refer you or, like in a position where they can actually hire someone. Like personally, I just found my first role through a random networking event. I wasn't even expecting to find work there, but there happened to be an MD of an agency there, and he used to be an ex-architect, so we instantly kind of got along, and there was a role open, and that's how it happened. It was through a networking event. And you could say it's by chance, but it's chance that you create by putting yourself in those places where you can network with people who are looking for junior staff, right? Because junior roles just generally aren't advertised, and that's still the case now, I feel. Some are, but as soon as it's gone on LinkedIn, there's going to be 1,000 applications. That's just how it is. So definitely, even if you're an introvert, and I myself am an introvert, like you have to put yourself out there and be uncomfortable. Otherwise, you are competing with a larger kind of like market at the moment with the way things are right now. You just have to get every edge that you can and try and expose yourself. Definitely research the market in terms of things like salaries and the roles that are out there. For example, there has been this shift recently away from a UX designer role to more of a product designer role, which is a bit more end-to-end. And they're expected to kind of deliver designs end-to-end from research to delivery and even have an understanding of like certain business requirements the way a PM would. So have an understanding of like what's expected of these roles and what's expected of a junior role. So just read the job descriptions very carefully, but not just the JDs, but just have a finger in the pulse on the market and see what's happening. So you can kind of align your portfolio or your resume more accordingly, if that makes sense. Do try and do additional projects if you can. Obviously, one of the great things about Harness is that they give you actually three different live client projects. A lot of the other boot camps, they might give you just a one, whereas Harness actually gives you three. So that's actually a fantastic foundation to build your portfolio. But if you really want to stand out, you can build even on top of the three that Harness is going to provide, and do one or two pro bono projects, things like with nonprofits, or even if you know someone who's building like a brand new startup, just help them out. Like you're not going to get paid, but it's the experience that you're after right now. And it shows initiative. And when you're actually, applying for roles, things like initiative, it's a really, really strong trait that comes through in like some of the more, kind of like high performing kind of candidates. Okay. So that's another piece of advice. Okay, so some additional advice I'd like to give for career transitioners is the first one might seem a bit silly and a bit obvious, but like, do you actually like designing? So what I mean is, UX, it's, always drawn a lot of career transitioners due to the relatively low bar of entry and better than average pay. However, if money is the sole motivating factor, then maybe think a bit more carefully about why you want to do this. Because you might not even get hired, because there's plenty of other people who not only may have a design background, but even if they don't, they clearly have a passion for design and for technology. And that's going to be quite obvious and very evident when you speak to or interview somebody. So if you actually bit, design's, it's okay. I'm just like, tech's just cool and I'll get paid better. Yeah, just think about the motivations about why you want to make that, career transition. Okay. So second thing is to kind of humble yourself. So being a career transitioner, I'm sure there's going to be people who come from quite senior roles. You might have managed people. You've got like 10, 15, even 20 years experience. And that's all cool. And there's heaps of transferable skills that you can bring to the table in your UX role, but leave the ego at the door. Okay. So don't bring that attitude of I've managed 10 people, do you know who I am, to like an interview to your new role, because you are technically starting at the bottom of the rung, because you don't know anything about UX design. You might have been managing a marketing team or whatnot, but yeah, you're an expert in marketing, but not in UX or in tech. So just be careful with that, because we have, like, most people we've encountered do have that humility, but we have encountered some people who have trouble kind of leaving that at the door. So just be hyper self-aware around that, right? Because that becomes very obvious very quickly when you speak to someone and they're just not having that self-awareness to go, okay, actually I'm a junior now and I should kind of like act accordingly. In saying that, like I said before, tech moves very quickly. So you can actually progress to a senior role within a few years. It's not like other industries where it might take a decade or more, okay? And just be mindful about the company you pick for your first role. So I get asked this all the time, what kind of company should I go into? They all differ depending if it's an agency, enterprise, startup. They all have their pros and cons. So just kind of research about the kind of pros and cons of each one, and just be very mindful. Although one piece of advice I would give is try not to, if you're new, don't get into a company where you're the first UX hire and the only UX hire, because you'd want more senior UX designers to kind of bounce off. You want to learn, right? Your first couple of years is all about being like a sponge and just learning as much as you can. So if you're the only UX designer in this startup or this company, they're not going to have the maturity to kind of like help you upskill through just osmosis, if that makes sense. Okay, so just finally, any misconceptions around, I guess, the UX transitioning is that the first one is the salary expectation. Sometimes, I don't know where it comes from exactly, but some people have this expectation is that just starting out, I'm just going to get this, six-figure salary, 100K right off the bat with no experience. It's just not going to happen. And for the ones that do, they probably already had some kind of like tech experience. You might have heard some, but they're not coming in as like, I have no experience and I'm going to expect this salary. It's just not going to happen. But like I said before, tech moves very quickly. So it's not it's not crazy to think that, you can actually progress quite quick if you know what you're doing and have the talent. And be able to hit like pretty decent salaries pretty quickly. Okay, so don't let that discourage you. It's not just about designing. Like I said, there's a lot of stakeholder management involved, a lot of those soft skills. Yeah, I think 50% of the time, actually even more, you might not even be designing. It might be just be all this other stuff you need to do. Want to touch on a mentorship, Because a lot of juniors come into interviews and roles going, okay, will I be assigned a mentor? It just doesn't work that way. Okay, they can't afford to put like a senior person to go around mentoring all the junior staff. Then their senior staff's got no time left to do the actual work, right? And mentorship is a very natural, organic thing. It's not something like, okay, you've been assigned this mentor, now go be best friends. It just doesn't work that way. Which is another great thing about Harness is that you're going to be exposed to three different mentors that you may vibe with, you may not vibe with, but there's different options there that you can actually start to build relationships with and potentially start to build a very organic kind of like dynamic of mentor, mentee. And just be mindful that, like it's a lot of commitment from a mentor to kind of like mentor someone. And, like you got to be mindful of their time commitments and whatnot as well. It's not just something that should be expected and go, okay, you should be my mentor now, give me all this like 10 hours a week, whatnot. They're getting something from you in terms of like, okay, they want to see you grow. They want to like strike like some kind of like friendship relation. However it works, it has to be organic, is my point. It's not something you can just go and demand. Okay. All right. So that gives you a bit of a rundown of, I guess, my journey. And hopefully you got something from that. But yeah, so thank you for listening, and I'll pass it over to Chad.
Thanks, Warner. That was great, mate. I really appreciate you going through the background of your journey into UX and a lot of really great insights there that hopefully everyone has picked up on. We'll hand over to Chad and we'll start his presentation for the webinar. So just a bit of background, Chad is a senior UX designer at Amazon in the US and has been mentoring with us for almost a year now, I believe, Chad. So time flies.
Yeah.
I'll hand over to you, mate. Take it away.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up. All right. So great job, Warner. You guys are going to hear a lot of the same stuff in my presentation. But I'm going to take a little bit of a spin on this. I wanted to approach it from, as I was thinking about this presentation, how can I provide the listeners a lot of value here, right? So if I were to start back and start my career, what would I do knowing what I know now? And so that's the approach and the direction I want to take with this. So a little bit about me. So I'm Chad. Chris has already said I'm a senior UX designer at Amazon. I've been designing for a long time. I think it's been about 22 years now. And so my path in design was not like Warner's. I pretty much started in UX from the beginning. However, I didn't know I was doing UX. And so how did I discover UX design? And you'll see this in my next slide, is that I discovered it unknowingly through just organically working with other coworkers and learning from them. And when I discovered it, it was an eye-opening experience for me because I'm like, oh, I could be at the forefront of designing something that actually can get put out into the real world. Literally happened inside my career in about my third job in designing things. And let me just walk you into my journey of my career. I was just going to sum it up in three areas, right? So the very start of it, I had started working in creative agencies. I got my degree in multimedia and web design. I didn't even know what UX was, but I got my degree in multimedia web design at a art institute in Illinois. And right out of the gate, all I cared about was how things looked and the visual design of things and how could it make things look cool. And so when I graduated, I got my first job at an agency where I had a chance to work on all kinds of celebrity marketing kind of interfaces, right? Everything from literally Aerosmith to Britney Spears to NBA and so forth, even Bon Jovi. If you guys know that in Australia, I'm not sure if you do, but a lot of people do know that in the US. So that's how I kind of got my teeth cut. I just threw myself into the fire and started making things look cool. And lo and behold, I was really doing UX at the time. I just didn't know that, right? I didn't have a formal training in UX. Again, I was just trying to make digital interfaces look really, really cool. And so my first 5 years of my career was doing that. And then in the middle of my career is basically where I stumbled across user experience design, and actually learned what I was doing was true user experience design. And what brought me to the middle of my career was I was tired of the agency world. And I wanted to, there had to be more processes, there had to be more rigor behind why some designs are going to be the way they are. And so in the agency world, I noticed that sometimes it was the loudest person who spoke up in the room was getting their opinion. In my head, I'm like, wait, that shouldn't have to be the case. I should be able to just justify this through like behaviors of people. And so that brought me to the middle of my career, which was starting to work in e-commerce. And I worked in companies like Office Max to Hyatt Hotels, and now obviously the big giant Amazon. But in the middle of that, that's where I learned UX design. And I'll walk you through some principles here in a couple of seconds about what I did with that. And obviously today I work at Amazon. I've been with Amazon for, it's going to be coming up on 8 years soon. It's a great company. Love working here. I get to design and solve problems at a world scale. And they're big, juicy problems for sure. So it's a really, really cool place to work for. So enough about me. Let's talk about you, right? So if I were you, we're like the questions I'd be asking is like, well, where do I start? Like, and what should I do next? And so I was thinking about this, and over my 20-year career, I have literally helped, even though I didn't transition into UX, I started in it, I literally helped 10 plus people move over into the UX careers, right? And all of these titles down below are literally the people I have helped out. I've helped out family members to friends who were electrical engineers, graphic designers, developer, musicians, oil fields, which is kind of like analogous to what Warner was saying with the mines, librarians, and construction. And the reason I wanted to show this is because I don't think it really matters where you're coming from, right? You're going to have skills no matter what that are going to transfer into the UX. Just as much as if I decided to go into electrical engineering or if I decided to go into architect, I know I can do it, right? And I know I'm going to have some skills that are going to translate over. There's always going to be something that's going to be able to move back and forth between different fields. So I wanted to give you like words of encouragement, like don't be shy with transitioning to UX. I would totally embrace it. And you could be in any type of field and move over into UX design. So the question is, it's like, well, where do I start, Chad? Like, what would you do? And for all the people I've helped transition, the first step I told them to do was get an education, right? It's going to be very important to get some sort of education so you can get at least a jump start, right? I've seen people throw themselves in it without an education, and sometimes they succeed, but I've seen most people succeed for how I help them transition to UX through an education, right? And here I have like 4 different types of education you can get. You can go in to get a certification from like another online course. You can go to college, which is what I did. You can be a self-directed career, we kind of learn on your own, like I just mentioned, and you could do boot camps, like Warner had mentioned before, right? And all of these are great, and a lot of these are how I directed a lot of my friends and other people to go down the path of. And again, sorry, Chris, at that time when I helped people transition, I didn't know about harness projects. But lo and behold, now that I have discovered harness projects, I think an amazing way to learn is by what harness does, right? Learn by real world experience. I can tell you right now, when I went to college, I did not have real world experience. It was just a bunch of theory. I was coding when I didn't even know how to code and just making things look cool. It didn't give me the experience of talking with stakeholders. It gave me nothing. But with Harness, you get that real world experience. You get to talk to founders of companies. You get to talk with maybe product managers. And you get to learn how they're thinking from a business standpoint and how you can best serve them from a user experience standpoint. So I can't encourage you enough to really consider Harness in this case, because it really does give you the real world experience I wish I had when I first started my career as well. So the next thing is like, well, what should I do, Chad? Like, okay, cool. What should I do? Right. So I wanted to leave you with 3 principles, right? And instead of giving like tactics and that kind of stuff, I'd rather give you more of like a principle way of thinking, right? And the first one is mindset, right? And we'll talk about that in 2 seconds. The next one is practice, right? You got to keep practicing. Just like Warner said, the tech field is always changing and there's always something new coming up. Wink, wink, AI. And then the third one is hustle. And you'll see why I think hustle is going to be the key one in all of that. So the mindset to grow, right? So you have to have a mindset to grow and continuously learn and learn and learn because of the changing landscape of the tech world, right? So embrace learning. In addition to like, there's going to be a lot of challenges that you're going to encounter, whether it be getting turned down in a job, whether it be not being able to solve a certain problem with inside of a user experience project that you're working on. But all of those are opportunities for you to learn and put those notches in your tool, or I'm sorry, in your belt to have that experience, right? Another one is have a mindset of seeking to collaborate, right? And seeking mentorship, just like Warner was saying. The reason why I say collaboration is because you'll see in this field of UX design, uh, it is dripping full of collaboration. If you're not collaborating, you're probably not going to be designing experiences that are going to be shipped out to actual people to use. And so collaboration is going to be a key thing here. In addition, stay open to new ideas, right? A lot of people can have a closed mindset, like this is the right way, this is the right way. But I'm telling you right now, been down that path where I have been in workshops and I've designed something up, this is the way, and then some other designer or some other business partner comes along and sketches something out. You're like, oh, yes, that's actually a better experience, right? Better for our customers. So stay open to new ideas and new ways of kind of approaching your career as well. Um, Develop strong communication skills. Now, I know, like in this audience currently listening, there could be introverts, there could be extroverts, but the key thing here is communication. In this design field, communication is going to be key because you're going to be communicating and talking with and collaborating with business partners, product managers, devs, VPs, CEOs, you name it, you're going to be talking with everyone because you need to communicate the design that you're putting forth to be able to get it pushed out so we can get the developers to develop it and then push it out to the real world for people to use, right? If you don't have that, you're going to have a difficult time with inside the user experience field. Communication is going to be key. I've seen many introverts communicate in different ways. Like some people are not very verbose in meetings, and that's okay, right? But they're great at the written word, right? So they're great at writing documents. That's a great way to collaborate as well. And then another thing is the mindset to grow. Always stay engaged with the UX community, right? The UX community is always really giving, and there's always conferences. There's always way for you to learn and grow and gain insights from other designers within inside the UX community. So I'll make sure you engage with inside that community. So I want to leave you with like that mindset to grow. Keep that instilled in your brains as we move forward. And then the next one is practice, right? We want to practice to stay up to date. Just like Warner said in his presentation, this tech field changes. It changes really, really fast, and you always have to stay up to date. And so I just put down a few bullet points here of things I've done personally, right? I have followed thought leaders. I used to be the biggest conference junkie in the entire world. I used to go to every single conference you could ever imagine. And it worked out great, right? And those conferences that I would go to would have those thought leaders, right? And you learn a lot. And I would take everything I learned from those conferences and bring it back and try to use it at my job, right? Reach out to learn, right? You can reach out to other people, like I just mentioned with the UX community. You could reach out to other people to learn, and the UX community is very giving. So I'm very confident that if you reach out to anybody, LinkedIn or other friends and that kind of stuff, they would be more than happy to help out. As an example, I literally had people reach out to me on LinkedIn, never knew them, asked for help to get into the UX field, yeah, of course, I would love to help you out, right? Have some lunch, talk to them about how to get into UX and so forth, right? I mean, this person just reached out randomly. So the UX community is very giving in that way. Next is internships, right? You're going to have an opportunity after like Harness projects to have internships, right? Take advantage of that. Those internships I've seen as an example at Amazon turn into full-time jobs because you get to see the employer gets to see how you work, and therefore once they can see how you work and they're like, oh my God, this person's great at what they do, you get pretty much an in right away. Another way is doing free work, right? I have a designer that I've mentored already and help them transition. They're actually doing free work right now, right? And they got that free work through networking. And it was here at South by Southwest here in Austin, Texas, and we just went to a Google for Startups meetup, and then next thing you know, we're meeting all these startup founders, and this friend of mine offered up to do free work. It's a great way to put in your portfolio. YouTube has great references. You could learn a lot on YouTube. I didn't have that when I was younger. Kind of wish I did, but YouTube's an amazing. Conferences I've talked about. Meetups are great. Meetups, there's actually, you can go to meetup.com and you can go to local meetups of UX designers within inside of your local area. And then you can start talking to like-minded individuals and you can learn how other people start their career and get advice from that. Networking events, I've already kind of talked about. I've learned personally, podcasts were the best way I learned. I just absorbed podcasts left and right. I used to listen to them all the time. So I would encourage you to find some UX design podcasts and just soak them in. Reading articles such as a Medium. There's plenty of UX thought leaders on those platforms like Medium that you can start learning as well. And then the key thing here is keep solving problems and design solutions and design solutions for the problems you might have, right? So if you have any problems that you see, start designing what you think could be a solution to it, right? And so obviously you want to be educated and how the design space works before you start designing, but you know what, why not? You could throw yourself in the fire and just start trying to design, hey, if I could solve this thing that I'm encountering, how could I solve this with an interface, right? And you could start sketching out solutions, right? So practice to stay up to date. All right, the last principle I want to leave you with is hustle, right? We want to hustle to differentiate yourself. The UX space has gotten very busy, right? Definitely busier from when I joined 22 years ago, right? So there's a lot of people in the UX space, right? So how could you differentiate yourself, right? And I wanted to leave you with these six ways you could do that. These are not all encompassing, and nor are they labeled in order of importance, but some of them that I think are going to be really important for you. And some of them that actually Warner had mentioned as well. So reach out, right? Don't be afraid to reach out. As soon as you get your education, you get your certification, or whatever path you choose to go down, reach out. And reach out to hiring managers, UX designers, recruiters, other people in organizations. Reach out to people to try to get that hook into the company that you want to work for, right? That's going to be key. As an example, the very first job I had, that celebrity brand management company I worked for, I literally called them every day. I don't know why I didn't care. I didn't know why. I mean, I was probably getting a little annoying. I'm not going to lie to you, but I really wanted that job. And that kind of goes to the passion that Warner was talking about, right? I really wanted that job. I wanted to design cool stuff. And so I would literally call them every day and I got the job. And so feel free to reach out. It's never going to hurt. Network, we kind of talked about network a lot already. Conferences, meetups, social hours, LinkedIn, and more. I've already talked about those, but networking is absolutely key here because when you have a friend, that friend is more than happy to give your resume to an employer, right? And then recommend you as well. The third one is be relentless. Like I'm kind of relentless, and I think relentlessness takes you a long way. Don't settle just in your first try. I know a lot of people that just apply to the job once and they don't do anything else, and they're like, I didn't get the job. Well, yeah, dude, because you didn't try your hard. You keep going at it, right? So be relentless. Show the company that you want to work for them, right? Show them that you're there, and you're going to be better, and you're going to show up more, and you're going to show up as a key employee for their company more than the other person that's trying to get the job, right? So be relentless in your approach with inside UX design, and that's going to take you very far because there's a lot of people that are very complacent. And then soft skills, just like Warner says. Soft skills, UX design has a lot of communication inside of it and a lot of collaboration, right? So you need to be able to convey your design decisions, and you need to be able to collaborate with other people inside the organization. It's just not UX designers you're going to be collaborating with. You're going to be literally collaborating with business people who all they care about is making money, right? So how do you communicate design to them, right? That's just one example. So soft skills are going to be something you really want to double down on. Again, stay up with industry trends, right? Like we talked about before, AI is the big thing right now, artificial intelligence. And it's a big deal at Amazon right now. And so you want to make sure you stay up on those trends. I currently do right now. I'm always reading and listening all kinds of podcasts and articles to make sure I stay up to date with industry trends, even to the point where I've literally figured out how can I code. Not that you have to. I just decided if I want to really understand artificial intelligence, how do I code? How do I code artificial intelligence? How does it work, right? And it took me a little bit. It took me pretty deep, and I was like, okay, that's enough. I don't think I could do that, but it gave me enough to be like, okay, I kind of know generally how AI works. And then the last thing is, and this is the big one for UX design, is problem solving, right? That's really what it comes down to. When you're designing something, you're solving a problem for people, right? So work on real world challenges and show how you've solved those complex design problems. And that's the beauty of Harness projects, is because Harness gives you those real world examples and those challenges for you to solve. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Chad. That was fantastic. Really appreciate you taking us through that presentation.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to pivot to all of these amazing questions that have been coming through. And I can see Warner has been trying to text answer some to help with the volume. I want to address some of the highly upvoted ones first, and then we'll just get through the list and we'll just hammer through it. So I want us to start with the most sort of crucial question that I think everyone is asking here is, what are your thoughts about the current UX job market? And is it possible to land a job as a junior UX designer right now? So Chad, would you like to say something?
Yes, yes, you can. Right? Absolutely. Yes, you can. Yes, the job market is pretty tough right now, and the only reason that is because of the pandemic. In all honesty, these companies had hired a lot of talent, and then unfortunately laid off a lot of the talent because of financials, right? So that flooded the market with a lot of people, and that's why you're having a lot of people apply to those jobs. But I mean, absolutely, you can get a job. I've had multiple friends already within the last 6 months get jobs, ranging from director levels to junior levels to internships and so forth. So do not be discouraged. I think if you take those 3 principles I had shown you in my presentation, those will take you a long way. Trust me, if there's a lot of people out there, the only way you can differentiate yourself is to be relentless, right? And to differentiate yourself. So the answer to that is yes, you can get a job. Well, it's going to be harder, but yes, you can get a job.
Awesome. Thanks, Chad. And so just on the next question we have here, what does a strong UX UI portfolio look like? How many projects should it include?
I mean,
Do
I can jump
you
in
want to take that
there.
one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I kind of written something there already. I think it's more about, it's not so much the quantity. I know you're asking how many case studies should I have. That's not really what's important. It's the quality of it, right? Because I've seen fantastic portfolios with only 2 case studies. But because the 2 case studies were so good, that's all they need. And if you think about it realistically, a hiring manager, it's not going to read through 5 case studies, like when they're trying to scan through who to hire. Really, the case studies, from my experience, how it gets used is that people, yeah, they'll scan through it and they'll scan for important pieces of information through the case studies, but they're not going to, they might even just look at one. So, but then the 1 or 2 that you show has to be the absolute best. Okay. So I really want to kind of reframe the questions like what is considered a high quality kind of case study? I guess that's a much more important question, because it's also that same case study that if you get to the interview stage, that's what you're going to be talking through with the hiring manager in detail. You might be speaking for about 20, 30 minutes on just that one case study. So even if you have that 1 or 2, you better make sure that, they're absolute best. And that would include, all, not just, I think a misconception is I've seen portfolios make this mistake, like show all the pretty pictures. Look at all the final output that I created for this case study. That's a massive mistake, because for a UX hiring manager or even product design, they want to see the process. They want to see all the kind of mess, and that's a good thing. All the mess that kind of like happen to get to that final pretty kind of like UI output, right? So I've definitely seen a lot of portfolios make that mistake of just putting the final output, whereas like 80% of that case study should be the story that you tell and how you tell that story of how you got to that final output. So I just wanted to reframe that question a little bit differently.
Yeah, great point. And I think, always think about your portfolio as it's really just an expression of your skills and your capability and, how you approach design. Thinking about numbers and portfolios and case studies, we get these questions a lot. And it's, as Warner said, it's so much about you're just trying to express your capabilities. And if you can do it in 2 portfolios or 3 portfolios, then that's enough, right? You don't need to have extra volume if it's really clear that you know the skills in those case studies that you have. Okay. This next question is just a simple one. How do you find networking events to go to? Any sort of tips on that? I know we covered a little bit of that in your presentation, Chad.
Yeah, meetup.com. That's, I don't know, that's the easiest one. A Google search. I mean, no joke, just a Google search. We're like local UX meetups, right? Or get-togethers, right? That's the way I would do it. That's the way I have done it, right? Or like even as an example, when Axure was in the game of UX design, which was it's like a prototyping thing. There was an Axure meetup. And when I was the manager, I was the manager at Hyatt Hotels. He was a designer. He's the one that led up the Axure meetup. So I just went, right? And there was, man, 100 people there, right? So it's just a great way of doing it. You're always in your city. There's going to be someone who's organized some sort of meetup for the UX discipline, to be able to go off and network. As another example, like remember, like UX design is translatable to any business, literally, like any business. Whether it's designing harnesses experiences, to designing Amazon, to designing oil field management. I mean, even down to like a nuclear reactors and nuclear facilities. Like that's literally UX design. You can go in there and design the interfaces to help control those types of things. So where I'm going with this is like, for what I would do is I would go into like startups, tech startup get-togethers, right? Or where these founders are trying to show off their stuff to raise money and stuff like that. Well, you can go there, and then that's maybe where you can go network with them and meet founders of tech startups who maybe are in AI and offered up to do free work and so forth. So just different ways you could do it. Just remember, open up your mind to many different possibilities. You can definitely find a network.
Just last night, I was at a pitch night for startups in Bondi here in Australia, and it was a 2-minute sort of pitch cycle, and there were about 30 startups there, and it took about 2 hours, and you could meet an incredible amount of founders, incredible amount of people who need design help as well. So it wasn't just a networking event. If you were looking for design work, you could probably find it with those startups in terms of sort of internships and some volunteering. So yeah, there are a lot of options, and always think a little bit outside the box. Like Chad said, think about the tools that are used in UX and then look up those companies. They'll have events, just like Figma, just like Azure in the old days and that sort of thing. So the next question is just more of a discipline area, role type distinction. What's the difference between a product designer, product manager, or UX designer? Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I'll have a crack, but maybe Chad, you can kind of add on top, because I might not get it completely right. Yeah, it's a very common question that gets asked. So first of all, I guess which one should I describe? Yeah, product manager versus a product designer. So product managers very much are focused more on the kind of business goals. So they're not designing, right? They've got the product designer there to speak to customers, to extract the customer insights and actually design the actual output that they need. What the product manager is more focused on are the business goals of like, okay, so then I'm being told that these are all the customer kind of like pain points and whatnot. How do I then prioritize everything so I can actually work with the development team to prioritize what we actually build? So then they make that call to go, okay, here's our kind of roadmap for the next sprint or cycle, whatever, and then make those decisions about what to prioritize based on all the information that's being fed to them, typically from a product designer or like a UX designer or from a UX researcher. So whereas a product designer, I guess the focus is on the design. The difference between this is where I might not get it fully right. In my opinion, a product designer versus a UX designer, I did say there's been this, I guess, recent shift towards more product designer roles versus UX compared to 10 years ago. Product design, I feel like, encompasses a much more end-to-end kind of expectation on the designer. So whereas a UX designer in the past might kind of like do a lot of, a lot of the UX research and then actually wireframe a design, the UI expectation is less on the UX designer, whereas for a product designer, the UI absolutely is part of their JD. Okay, so they need to do not just the research and then wireframe everything, and then actually create a UI output. On top of that, they also need to have the product designer, I feel, also has to have a little bit of what the product manager does in terms of that understanding of like the business requirements, like what's the business objectives of this, because they are working so closely with the PM to go, okay, well, whereas a UX designer, I know in the past, they can kind of like not a silo, but put less emphasis on like what are the business goals. Their focus is mainly on the customer and actually extracting what the customer actually needs. Whereas I feel the product designer now is in a way a little bit of a unicorn in terms of the expectation of, well, you got to take it all the way from research all the way to the final UI output and work very effectively with, you know, not just the developers but the PM as well. Whereas I feel like the UX designer's kind of scope is slightly less than the product designer. Okay, so that's the way I put it. Chad, I'd love to kind of get your take as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're pretty accurate in that. I mean, product manager decides what to build. The UX designer slash product designer designs how it's going to work, right? So it's what and how, right? That's kind of how I differentiate between product manager and UX design slash product design, right? And then now the I think Warner, I think you're right. I think with the UX designer, people had a narrow scope of work and what the expectations of what they're supposed to do. Albeit like at Amazon, we're called UX designers. I think, you know, technically we can also call ourselves product designers because I mean we pretty much do everything. Right? There's never been nothing that we do everything. Like I've done my own research. I've helped write requirements. I've helped come up with ideas for what a product could be, right? Literally a brand new product, all the way to execution and so forth. So the difference, yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the difference between UX design and product design. It's just semantics. It's, you know, because UX design, I mean, I'm doing product design at UX design, or I'm sorry, I'm doing product design at Amazon, but we call ourselves UX designers. So I wouldn't worry too much on the differentiation between those two. What I would worry about is the differentiation between, or think about is the differentiation between a product manager and a UX slash product designer. The product manager is going to be one of your best friends. Like you got to work with them day in and out.
Yeah, great points, guys. And I just want to add one other layer or perspective on this, more from sort of a macroeconomic point of view. You know, obviously the world after COVID entered a cycle of inflation. You know, there was a lot of money in the system from the stimulus through COVID, and this has had an impact on interest rates and those sorts of things. And all businesses were impacted by this, right? To a degree where businesses have had to be more lean, more efficient with the resources that they have. So there's a natural tendency for business owners to say, I actually want my designer to do everything. I don't want to have to hire two people, one researcher and one UI designer. Let's do a product designer who can tackle both. The reality in practice is that there's only a very small, very senior sort of layer of people who are very strong and at mastery for all those skills. And so, you know, the roles and the job descriptions look like that. But as Chad said, don't worry too much about whether you're applying for a UX role or product role, particularly earlier in your career. You know, you'll have an opportunity to express your strengths in that role and develop the ones that need development, just like anyone in a design role. So hopefully that helps give us some understanding about why there's always this shift between different names of things. But that's sort of my perspective on it. Okay, I'm gonna bring up this question from Salim, who asks, when building a portfolio and getting real world experiences, I find that it can be challenging to explain to stakeholders what I can do and how I can help their business. Do you have any recommendations on an elevator pitch or ways to overcome objections when trying to gain that experience prior to getting an official paid role in the UX UI field?
There's one technique that I've advised some students to try, and it's worked to some degree. And it's not, you don't typically go up to, you know, like a, you know, non-profit or company, go, hey, can I do some free work for you? A lot of times they'll be skeptical. It's like, oh, no, you know, like no time, whatever. So what I suggested that they do is actually just go on their website and actually find something wrong with their website and then fix it and then present that to them and then go, hey, do you want me to do some work for you? Because then you're already giving something for nothing, right? That you're already pointing out. They may already know this, but number one, it shows the initiative, and number two, might even better, like show them something that they didn't spot, and they instantly seeing value from you as like, you know, someone who actually like does UX and go, oh, okay, maybe I should listen to this person, give this person like 5 minutes of my time because they've actually out of their own time pointed out something that's glaringly wrong with our own website. Okay, so I think that kind of more proactive approach is always going to be a lot more effective, I feel, as opposed to just, hey, can you do something for me? Like, can you give me some work? If that makes sense. So always kind of like, especially if you're like just starting out, you know, like try and think of it as like, what can the client or the potential stakeholder get, as opposed to what can I get from them in terms of that mentality. I feel like it's always a much healthier and much more effective approach. And I know a few students have actually gotten some luck in getting some, it's not paid work, but it's actual work that they can actually add to their portfolio, right? So that's definitely one technique that I've seen work. Chad, if you've got any other suggestions.
Yeah, I think, you know, another perspective to look at this is that surprisingly, in 2024, a lot of tech companies sometimes don't even know what UX design is. Believe it or not, it's true. And so that might be why you could find it challenging, right? Because that business or stakeholder, the business person or the stakeholder may not even know what you do, right? And so it may require you to have to educate them on what the value of UX design is, right? And how it can actually help their business. And then it will open up their eyes as to the value that it can bring. So I run into that problem to this day, all the time. Yeah, even at the biggest tech company in the world, right? A lot of people don't know because everyone's too busy doing their job, right? And to be honest, it's good. It's okay, right? It's okay that they don't know, right? Just as much as sometimes I don't know exactly what they do all the time, right? But if you're trying if you're having a challenge to explain this to stakeholders or businesses, think that, hey, maybe do they even understand what UX is, right? And approach it from that standpoint.
Guys. Hope that helps, Salim. Our next question is on AI influence in the UX process. What's your perspectives on how AI will inform UX? This person it's anonymous, has said, obviously it will disrupt, but how do you see the industry adapting or adopting? Thanks.
Yeah, I can have a crack at it first. I think there's an overall fear that, you know, obviously there's opportunities and fears. But I sense there's a bit of fear, not just people looking for work, but even amongst practitioners now. It's like, is AI going to take over our jobs? I think that's a very valid question to ask. Is like, is it going to become the UX designer? Is it going to become the UX researcher? At the moment, I feel like I could be dead wrong on this. Don't take my word on this. I don't think that's what it's going to do. What it's going to do is actually be a great accompanying tool for the practitioners who know how to wield it. And the ones who don't know how to wield it might be left behind. That's the way I kind of see it. So it's definitely something that if you're going to go into tech, you definitely have to learn how to harness to your advantage. And I know for a fact that Canva, I reckon 80% of the people at Canva use it. I mean, it's a massive thing that Canva's pushing in itself in its own product, but it's also using things like ChatGPT and, you know, things like all the text image kind of like things like, you know, Midjourney and Leonardo and whatnot. It's very much heavily used by, you know, by PMs, by PDs, by all sorts of different roles. And if you're not, then you're likely going to be less efficient in terms of how you do things. Like, for example, I definitely use ChatGPT, and like AI has been being integrated in a lot of the tools that researchers use, things like Dovetail and stuff like that. They all have AI on them, and it definitely does make things easier. It's still in its infancy, and, you know, like it's not polished, but you can definitely see where it's going to go. So yeah, so to reiterate my point, I don't think it's going to take over jobs in the next 5 years. I might be dead wrong, but I feel like as a practitioner, you definitely know how to kind of wield it to your advantage, because the ones who don't use it and ignore it are definitely going to be at a disadvantage, I feel. But yeah, Chad, over to you.
Yeah. I might be wrong with saying this, but I believe when farmers, back in the day, when farmers were doing everything by hand, and then with agriculture, and then these big machines came along that make producing agriculture a lot easier, the farmers were like, we're out of business. We're out of business. We're not going to be able to sustain it. And lo and behold, it's what, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years later now, everything's fine, right? It just enhances their ability to do more, right? To go off of what Warner was saying, it makes them more efficient in what they do, right? And so I think the same thing applies to AI, right? You should be looking, I mean, by the way, a lot of those images in my presentation were from AI, from ChatGPT, because I didn't want to have to go search for it. I'm like, hey,
Yeah, me too, Chad. Me
so
too.
Um, but use AI to make you more efficient, to make you a better, to help you provide more value, right, in the space. I again, I could be wrong. I just don't see how AI can do my job yet. I don't. Because it's hard. Because of all those soft skills and all those things I had mentioned in the presentation, right? And AI is not going to get up and try to create a shared understanding and getting buy-in of stakeholders. It's just not going to happen, as far as I can see, right? And so those types of things are gonna take you a long way. I mean, AI can help you generate flows, as an example. AI can help you generate style guides. AI can help you do UI, right? AI can help you write, which I'm horrible at. AI could do a lot of things to help augment and make you better, but I don't think it could do the human things of solving super, super complex problems, and most importantly, collaborating with those internal stakeholders.
Great points, guys. And this is such a mindset type of question. If you think about it, don't allow the fear of a new technology stop you from growing or progressing. We don't know how AI is going to evolve in the next 5 to 10 years. But obviously, if you read a lot of media, it's always going to be doom and gloom and fear-based. So just be mindful of that, and don't let that get in the way of your progress as an individual. Chad.
If you have a lot of fear, just go work for an AI company.
Good point. Good point. And the next question is along the same lines. I think we've answered that. It's just around, how important are UI skills right now, given what AI generates. I mean, AI generates some pretty cool imagery, but I have tried to use it to get something specific, and really it ended up taking me more time rather than just designing it ourselves. So I don't think it's there yet from a UI point of view, but what do you guys think?
I think you're going to see that they're going to be AI in terms of UI and UX and all that kind of stuff is going to be embedded with inside the tools that you use, right? So it's going to augment what you do, right? So if you're like, man, I can't think of a great color scheme for this design system that I'm trying to put together, right? Then maybe some AI inside of Figma, as an example, could help generate that for you, right? Or if you're stuck on like the visual hierarchy of a screen that you're working on, right? Maybe you could ask the AI, hey, how can you generate, based on the elements that you see, can you generate another variation, an iteration of what you're seeing, right? And so then now you become kind of a curator of experiences. So I see that's kind of how AI is going to be embedded in the tools that we use, and it's going to help augment augment our ability to explore different UI. But at the end of the day, like asking it to put together an entire interface, I mean, I bet you $1 million that there's probably some company right now working in that, right? But I think for organizations like an Amazon, I don't think they're going to adopt it anytime soon because of privacy and security issues and so forth. So, but I really do see AI and UI being augmented in the tools that you use.
We currently, with one of our curriculum partners, updating some training material that's reflective of what Figma has just announced. For those who saw the recent conference that they held, there were some AI updates coming to their tool. It's all in beta still, but we're at the forefront of just making sure that's implemented. And so any students who've been through our course already or who are going to be through it in our course will get access to that. And it's a lifetime access to that curriculum. So yeah, as Chad said, it's always going to be a sort of tool aspect that are included in things like Figma that we need to learn and make use of. Okay, so just moving to a question. This is a little bit of an Australian specific question, but this person, anonymous, is new to Australia from Hong Kong with 5+ years experience in UI UX, but is finding it quite difficult to find a job here. Has sent a lot of CVs, but didn't get any feedback. How do we write an outstanding CV to catch a recruiter's eyes?
Yeah, I can have a crack at that. It's a common question that my students ask too. First of all, just to set the context, like it's not like a few years back where, it is more competitive. So chances are like the hiring managers are being inundated with more CVs than they were a couple of years ago. So that's a massive, obviously factor. In saying that, there's definitely a few tips that I give my students. I'm sure some of you may be aware of this, but whether fortunately or unfortunately, especially some of the bigger companies, for the first pass of CVs, they are using an algorithm just to pass through, and some never see the light of like human eyes don't actually parse it. It's just the way it is. So, you know, they're going to look out for things like formatting and keywords that are not kind of like ticking the box, so to speak. So one example being, is it being catered, like, and I tell my students this for all the CVs that they submit, is it being catered to the specific job description? Because a lot of students I know are tempted to kind of send the same CV for every single job description. That just doesn't fly right now anymore. Unfortunately, it does take more time, but once again, use AI, use ChatGPT, because I guarantee all your competitors are using ChatGPT to help them write these CVs, curate it to the job description. Because even if it's not the AI algorithm doing it, the hiring manager is scanning for keywords. Okay, just for you to get past that first hurdle, make sure you are using similar phrases and similar keywords. If it's true, don't make things up, that are actually catered to the job description. So read the job description carefully. One trick I always tell my students is just to paste that job description into your ChatGPT and then ask it to give you the foundation for what's going to be a great CV. It's that simple, and then build on top of that. So don't just send the raw ChatGPT kind of feedback and go, "Ah, that's my CV." But this is a perfect example where you can use AI to save time, because you might be sending 10, 15 CVs per day, just as an example, to write like, you know, custom, you know, CV 10, 15 times a day. It takes a long, long time. So, you know, leverage AI to your advantage to do something like that, because chances are you're not even getting past the first hurdle, because you might be using a generic, I might be wrong, you may be using a more generic CV. So whereas other people, they're not. They are curating each and every single CV, every paragraph, every sentence that they're writing to make sure it's targeting that job description. Formatting is also important, because I've seen all kinds of funky formatting, because you think, oh, I'm going for a UX designer role, I better make my CV really fancy. Please don't do that. Don't do 2, 3 column and graphics and images all over. Just to keep it simple. If you're junior kind of entry level, it shouldn't be more than a page, to be honest, because even like really senior level CVs, they're like 2 pages. So for you, it should be a 1-pager, very succinct bullet points. Don't write walls of text that are just hard to read. The best CVs I've seen are just 1 pages, and it just gets to the point about everything. Okay. And it's 1 column format. I generally find they have a lot more success. But yeah, it's just little things like that. And there's other stuff, but I just want to point out a couple of, I guess, common mistakes that I've seen students make when it comes to the CV. I'm sure Chad can add a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, plus one to everything you just said, Warner. I think a little tip that I can give everyone is something called a living resume, right? So what you could do is you can go on Google Docs, it's free, and you can write up your resume. And as you start having accomplishments and you start doing things in the field, start writing down all of those accomplishments in a living resume, right? Because what that does then, as you are like 3 jobs in or whatever it is, you're going to have a running list of all these things that you've done, right? And then just as Warner said, what you can do is you can start taking those specific accomplishments, and then tailor them. Pick the ones that are tailored to the specific job that you're applying for, right? As for example, if you were applying for like a B2B enterprise thing, enterprise company, start looking at some accomplishments that are related to B2B enterprise, right? And you can only do that if you have a long living resume document. So just a little tip there, to do. That's what I do. I haven't done it in a long time, but because I've been at Amazon, but I did do that before.
Thanks, guys. Awesome. Okay, we're going to jump to another question just on experience, like the level of experience you need for that first role. So this person asked just around, you know, the bar that is set to 2 years, at least from their perspective. Is that accurate? Is that what you're seeing for new roles, or are people getting roles with less than that experience?
Yeah, I can start. And I think Chris alluded to this earlier. When someone puts out a job description, they're always going to want more than what they kind of
Yeah,
expect, if that makes sense. So they're going to say 2 years. But if you're the right candidate, they will hire you even if you don't have 2 years.
right.
You know, I remember doing this even. We're guilty of this in the agency when we put out a job description. We're always going to put in every single thing in our wish list, knowing that we're not going to check off every box with that final candidate. Okay, so this is a bit of it's not a secret. I think it should make sense. If you're the hiring manager, of course you're going to want the absolute unicorn who can do everything, you know, but we know realistically that we're not going to get that unicorn. But the job description is the unicorn. So when it says 2 years, do not feel too disheartened by that, because they're all junior and grad roles are going to say 2 years, and some even say more. None of them are going to say we need absolutely no experience required. It's not going to say that on the JD. So yeah, some of them might show a sense of immaturity, but I guarantee you a lot of these JDs is just, yeah, we're going to say 2 years because like yeah, why not? We want the best, and pay them less money. So it's just the nature of how, like JDs get pushed out. So yeah, I have definitely seen junior roles being offered to people with no technical UX experience, but on the JD it says at least 1 or 2 years required. I have seen that. So please don't be too disheartened. Okay.
Yeah, and then also don't be disheartened by like sometimes people putting out these job descriptions or job descriptions. Sometimes they don't know. They literally don't know. Like in some, I can go through and look at all of the job requirements and like this person doesn't even know what UX is because they literally ask for everything. They want you to be the developer, the product manager, the user researcher, the UX designer, and shoot, maybe even the CEO, right? It's like, like they literally, I mean, like it's crazy. And I get a lot of people I mentor come back. It's like, right, is this normal for them to ask for you to code and know JavaScript and know all the stuff? I mean, kind of back in the day a little bit, but now, no, man, no way. That just kind of like a lot of people, you can tell someone putting out a job description and they don't know what they're doing, putting out that job description, right? So be careful with that as well. It should be primarily focused on designing experiences, right? Designing experiences to enhance the customer's experience, right? And or create products, right? It's kind of what it all revolves around.
Yeah, if anything to add to that, to what Chad said, I mean, if you can be a bit more picky, if you want to be a bit more picky, I would see that as a giant red flag. If they push out a JD says you need to do
Yeah,
you'll be like, okay, this company doesn't know what UX is. Do I really want to work for this company? Okay,
right,
remember I said you
exactly.
don't want to end up being the first UX hire or the only UX hire. It's not going to benefit you. This is not a giant red flag.
Yeah, I remember taking a job and it said that I have to code all my prototypes. And I was like, oh crap. I just threw myself in the fire. I'm like, man, I don't know how to code prototypes. I only know how to do with like Axure and that kind of stuff. So I started learning how to code, and then when I got in the job, it didn't even come true. It's like, they stress you out in the beginning, but it's like it doesn't even come true. So, but
Nice.
yeah,
Awesome. Okay, next question is just coming. This is a longer question, I think, around someone with a web content SEO marketing background. So they say, coming from a web content and SEO background, what are some recommendations to upskill in UX UI roles? Second part of their question is just a second. So that when someone with a lot of experience in communications wants to consult and make recommendations for the UX side, what indicators would make me more qualified than someone just pulling ideas from thin air? Okay. So yeah, how does someone upskill if they are coming from that sort of marketing side to be able to consult and provide advice that might have some UX aspects to that advice without just making it up?
I mean, one of the obvious answers is to probably take a bootcamp course like Harness. I mean, if you want to upskill in UX UI roles, I believe like yeah, like the best way is to actually just do right. And that's I mean, that's like what else can you do? I mean, you can read books. I mean, you can get theoretical, but really the best way to kind of upskill genuinely UX UI is to actually do UX UI, whether it's through projects you're doing on the side, like actual client projects, or even easier, just get exposure to real life client projects like the way Harness offers it to you. With the second part of your questions, I'm trying to understand. Chris, could you maybe clarify what that second part of the question might mean? So they're saying, so that one's someone with a lot of experience in
I think,
communication.
yeah, that's more like the outcome of this is how I read it, but feel free to anonymous to send something in the chat. But I read it as after the upskilling process in UX UI, um, you know, yeah, what indicators would make them more qualified to basically give some advice
Okay,
because
I
they've come
think
from
I got you.
marketing and there is that blend that sometimes moves into UX UI.
Yeah,
Um,
okay. Compared to someone just pulling ideas from thin air.
yeah,
Okay, well, I mean,
I think
the
they've
whole point.
answered their own question there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll try it. Like, I think, like you kind of touched on the whole point of UX is that you're not meant to be pulling ideas from thin air, right? And kind of the foundation of doing UX is that you're actually basing design decisions on actual, feedback from customers, from actual data, whether that's qualitative data. So that's meaning, like doing user interviews, which is kind of like the bread and butter of what UX designers do. That's where we get a lot of our data from, or possibly even quantitative data. I'm sure, Chad working Amazon, there'll be heaps of, like internal analytics that you can kind of like leverage and analyze to kind of make certain design decisions. So it'll be a mix of the qualitative and the quantitative. That way, you're actually making design decisions based on data and actual customer behavior, as opposed to okay, the whole loudest voice in the room kind of mantra of going, okay, well, we're just going to do this because we think it's going to work. I think that's what's going to ultimately set you aside. So if you're actually doing UX properly, it's all about data-driven kind of design decisions. Hopefully that answers your question. I think it does partly, but please clarify in the chat if it hasn't.
Actually, yeah. So Christina's messaged in the chat with just a clarification. I've found your question further down in the QA list, Christina. Thanks for that. So look, this second part of this question was, it sounds like you're already making AIA and UX recommendations, but you want to upskill. And yes, as you mentioned, would the Harness upskill version of your course be better to beef out my skills and contributions? Great question. We do actually enroll a lot of marketing background candidates who want to do, say, 1 or 2 projects with us instead of the full career launcher that someone who actually wants to be a UX designer would do. So yeah, that's totally a realistic avenue for you. Potentially the UX fundamentals project, which is a 9-week project. That would be a great way for you to learn the end-to-end UX UI process and get a good foundation of not just how it works, but the terminology and a process to fall back on when you are in that sort of consulting space. So yeah, we've seen quite a few marketers who've done that and then use that to elevate some of their consulting work or marketing work if they're working for an employer. So hopefully that helps. Feel free to reach out. I can give you more information on our upskiller courses. Okay, cool. So just jumping to the next question. So we've touched on this a little bit in some of the prezos, but just to reiterate, what skills does an experienced print designer need to get into UX design? There seems to be a very thin line between UX and UI designer when it comes to job openings. So what is, I guess, the gap that a print designer needs to fill to become the UX designer? Such a common, transition step, particularly as everything modernizes into digital.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a rudimentary answer to that. Print design's static, right? UX design, you're designing dynamic interfaces, things that data can change the display states and all kinds of different aspects of the experience changes, right? Imagine it being like a print piece that that can change based on how you interact with it, right? We design those experiences that are fully interactive and rich for people, right? Whereas print design is a static thing. You have to read it and then you're kind of gone, or maybe you carry a brochure, or maybe you have like a billboard or whatever it is. It is what it is. It's printed, it's done, right? Whereas with what we do with interfaces, it's always changing, it's always iterating, it's always getting updated, it's always changing, right? And there's all different types of users that come in and use your interfaces. And so when they use something, how can you design an experience that's best for them, right? And so I think that's the biggest difference. And so the skills you could take from print design is that you kind of have good typography skills already, right? So that's going to translate into UI, right? You understand visual hierarchy if you're in print design. So now you can design interfaces that you can design it to allow people to focus on certain elements over other elements first to help them accomplish the tasks that they need to do in the interfaces that they're using. You understand aesthetics, spacing, all kinds of those kind of Gestalt principles, if you will. You can get that from graphic design. So I think graphic design, to be honest with you, my wife was a graphic designer and I helped her transition to UX, right? So graphic design, I think, is ripe to come into UX design, personally.
Thanks, Chad. Awesome.
Yeah.
What type of website templates and layouts do you recommend for portfolios? There are some off-the-shelf things. I know, Warner, you talked about building your own. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I built my own. I wouldn't recommend it. It's just simply because I wanted to learn CSS, HTML as a personal thing. But it wasn't the most time efficient. It took me a long time. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. I definitely recommend building a website for a portfolio. So, there's things like Wix is a very well-known one. I've used that before. I haven't used a whole bunch of them, but honestly, just a simple Google search, you'll find a whole bunch that are very comparable to Wix and possibly even better than Wix. I found it personally very user-friendly. So even if you don't have a technical background, it is far easier than building your own website from scratch. So I would highly recommend that. But yeah, I'm sure Chad can add to that as well.
Yeah, don't build your website. Sorry, I've been down that route too. And I went even easier. I went down the path of doing WordPress and modifying WordPress. It still gets pretty hairy if you don't know how to code 100%, or
Yeah.
better said, is do markup. So I think hiring managers kind of don't care. I mean, I've been a hiring manager, right? So I know I don't care um, if you didn't code your own website. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is understanding how you solve the problem, um, and then and how the output of it, right? How do the customers or the people that you design something for, how do they receive it? Is it helping their lives? Is it making their lives better? And I want to see the process that you went through. That's what I care about. I don't care about what website. Use a standard template that everyone else uses. It's what's inside there that matters. It's what you put in it is what matters. You know, like I personally would not care um, that you did UX design on your portfolio. I mean, just make it obvious that you put some effort and time into it. But if it's just using another template that's already out there that maybe some other people have used, then that's okay. Just make sure that you can differentiate yourself by the insides, your use cases or your case studies, right? You want to make sure those are going to be robust and tell the story of how you solve the problem.
Thanks, guys. Just one last piece on that, because I've reviewed probably hundreds of portfolios from our graduates over the years, and the one thing, you don't need to code your own website. Building your own website using a tool or a template, I think just the distinction there is a viable approach. Totally fine. Wix, there are others out there, Squarespace. UX Folio is another tool that actually is a website that you just sort of click and drag and drop, but the template is for UX portfolios. It's very focused in that way. Some of our graduates use that, and I think the key thing to remember with whatever the website shell is that shell needs to get out of the way of your portfolio. If the website design itself is complex to navigate, is difficult to read or anything like that, you're just going to limit the hiring manager's chance to see your great work. And I've seen students submit things that they've done themselves, which honestly, the design just gets so complicated and cumbersome. It's the mental load for a review. And this is, we're doing this because we want to review the graduates' work to help them, have the best chance of finding a job. A hiring manager won't spend that time. They will click the close button and move to the next application. So you want the design to get out of the way of your portfolio, so your portfolio stands on its feet, and it's the content of your portfolio that needs to come through.
Can I say one thing real quick? Like when we say the content, that more doesn't equal better, right? So when you are building your portfolio, think about who you're building it for. You're building it for someone who doesn't have too much time, who has a plethora of people to look at, right? And so how can you stand out? How can you differentiate yourself, right? So I was thinking as you're talking, because I think the key thing here is less is more, right? Be concise with how you communicate, because number one, people don't read, right? As much as you want to like put together like a long case study and write, no one will read it. No one is going to read that, right?
Yep.
So how could you be concise? And ChatGPT can help you shorten up your descriptions and so forth, and help you tell your story quicker and more effectively.
Yeah, and use scannable headings, not headings that just have one word. Let the heading tell you what we're up to, so that I can quickly go to it and see, okay, this is how they address their customer research and what the insights were. Okay, next question. I'm going to try and move through these a little quicker, just to get through as many as possible. Any best practices on getting a mentor within the industry?
Just ask. I mean, it's just as easy as that. I've done that, right? Be authentic, be nice. Just ask, hey, I'm really new to this field. I really, really find this interesting. I see that you have a long career. I would love to be able to have you be a mentor. Just be authentic and be nice and just ask. You can just ask on LinkedIn cold. You know, I've gotten that from people. I've even done it myself. I have mentors too.
Yeah,
Morning.
and that approach definitely works. I would add that, the approach of how you do that kind of cold approach, it always helps to have some kind of common connection. It's like maybe as opposed to, hey, can you be my mentor? Like just don't do that. But you might have read an article that they wrote, or they might have attended like a certain conference, so like find some kind of common I guess like topic where you can actually kind of like so it comes across that you actually did some research about that person as opposed to, hey, I'm just blasting, 500 people on LinkedIn with the same question, can you be my mentor? Like, be a bit more kind of like measured in terms of like how you do that approach. And yeah, because you are ultimately just asking people cold, is like, hey, I need something from you. And once they do agree, just be mindful and considerate of like times, because like they probably can't give you 10 hours a week of their, they're probably people, what I mean? So just be mindful of little things like that as well. But yeah, definitely to Chad's point, yeah, don't be shy. Just reach out. And obviously, or if you meet someone at a meetup, in person, approach them. Just say hi. You just got to get out of your shell. I mean, easier for some people than others, I'm sure, but that's what you got to do. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. So probably our most upvoted question today, and this is for you, Chad. What's a Bon Jovi?
No one
Well,
knows Bon Jovi?
this is anonymous who
Yeah.
asked, "What's a Bon
Showing our
Jovi?"
age, Chad. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I'm old, man. I'm probably the oldest person in this call today. Um, Bon Jovi is just a rock band. And so like when I worked in the celebrity management, brand management company, I got to work with Bon Jovi, like literally him. That's his last name. I forgot his first name. I don't even know. But yeah, that he is literally a rock star that's super famous in the US. He's old now. I mean, he was super famous in the 80s and 90s. But
Yeah,
yeah.
we do know of Bon Jovi in Australia. Just
Oh, okay, okay. You never know, man. You never know. You never know.
um, cool. All right. So next question. Are there any differences in expectations for a UX portfolio if you're applying at an agency, a startup, or a corporate?
I think that depends, right? Depends on the agency. If you're just, it depends on the different type of agencies that you're applying for. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's relatively the same across all of them. I mean, maybe there, I'm trying to think about like, so as an example, well, the agencies that I worked at were strictly marketing, like they were marketing agencies. And so they're probably looking more for marketing type of experience design, right? Whereas agencies such as IDEO or these other kind of like product focus agencies, they're more interested in solving problems and augmenting, or they're being hired by these bigger companies to create products and services on behalf of the customers. And so you're going to be doing product design, right? So and there's a difference between kind of like that flashy marketing design, because that's all you're trying to do is acquire customers, um, versus actual product design where you're designing an experience that is for someone to use, right? So imagine Billboard versus an actual like iPhone app, right? There's a big difference between both of those. And so if you are applying to an agency, there's going to be different types of agencies that do different types of things, right? And then for an organization, I think it depends on the role that you're applying for, right? I know there's marketing design, marketing recs or job listings out there, and you're going to be doing the same thing. You're going to be designing experiences to help the acquisition of new customers and make sure that their product is known. But then if you're applying to something where you're building out a platform, as an example, to help some operations or whatever it might be, that's more like product specific, right? You're designing something that someone needs to use uh, um, and use day in and day out. So I think those are the differences off the top of my head. Warner, am I missing anything you think, or?
No, I think you've covered most of what I was going to say. So yeah, can't add more.
Thanks, guys. Guys, any particular UX podcasts that you recommend?
Lenny's. I love. It's just me personally, like Lenny's podcast. I think that's what it's called. Is pretty famous, but he talks about like a lot of product startups and that kind of stuff. If you do a UI, no, I'm sorry. Oh my God, NNN Group, Jacob Nielsen's and Norman and Nielsen or Nielsen Norman, I forgot. NNG. It's a great podcast. I'm sorry, I'm tripping on the names right now. That's a great one too. I gotta look at my Spotify search. Hold on.
Any come to mind for you, Warner?
Yeah. Sorry, with podcasts, I like to say, like, because it reminds me of work too much. So the podcasts I listen to are like true crime and like history, like
Right.
not tech related. I'm sorry. So that's one area where tech does not kind of like play a role in my day to day. So sorry, can't add more to that.
Yeah, for me, guys, like I know I'm the one that mentioned the podcast. Like I'm very self-taught throughout my career, and that's how I taught myself. is through podcasts, conferences, and just applying it. But there's like, I'm looking right now, there's like Design Better podcast. I love listening to startup podcasts like Mark Andreessen. I love listening to Twist, This Week in Startups. That's not going to help you with UX specifically, but the Jacob Nielsen or Nielsen and Norman Group podcast is going to be great for you to listen to. You can go on YouTube and search just like UX design. There's going to be people like who said, "Hey, this is how I got my job in Google. Right? Here's my resume and here's my portfolio." Right? You can do stuff like that. Um, um, just kind of like be scrappy about it, right? Just go find something that you think is good. But and then an NNG Group, I think Nielsen and Norman Group is a great podcast, and the other ones I mentioned as well.
Thanks, man. Great. Um, Warner, what do you think about the culture of being relentless here in Australia? Chad was talking about that, obviously, from his perspective, but do you think that would backfire in an Australian culture?
Yeah, I saw that. That's a very interesting question because we've just recently had a couple of Americans join our team inside Canva, and just there's a slightly different perspective. It's yeah, they're like everyone's so chill here, all laid back. It's like you're not at each other's throats trying to get jobs. Like what's going like in their words, not mine. It's tongue in cheek, obviously, it's a bit of a joke, and there definitely is a bit of a cultural difference, I find. I mean, like just based on the Americans I've met, and based on having grown up here, the relentlessness and hyper competitiveness, I feel, even though Americans and Australians have a lot of common, shared common kind of like values, the hyper competitiveness, I feel like the Americans do kind of like have that a little bit more compared to here. We might not just show it as much. Um, would it backfire? I don't think it will backfire. I think from a company's perspective, they like seeing that from candidates, unless they're a particular kind of company. Like it depends how you kind of show it, right? The relentlessness can be kind of like demonstrated in so many different ways. As long as you're not like an ass about it,
Yeah,
like that's actually a good trait because it shows that you're going to be a hard worker. You're going to show initiative.
yeah,
You're going to be, like there's so many positive traits that I associate with it, but I can also see in certain company cultures, they might kind of see that, oh, are you going to kind of like rock the boat a bit too much? Are you going to be like difficult to get along? Like I can see it from both perspectives. So, but from a hiring manager perspective, I think that advice is sound. It's like, I don't see it causing an issue, to be honest. It's just generally it becomes an issue, because in Australia, I'm not sure about if it's the same in America. It's this whole, oh, we don't hire assholes kind of policy. It's very common in Australia. It's like, we don't want to hire assholes. It's all about cultural fit. I'm sure that's all very important in America, but in Australia, we put big emphasis on hiring for the right cultural fit, sometimes even above and beyond the actual technical skill sets, because people generally do really want to, just be in a harmonious working environment here. Like I said, could be the same in America. It's just that I noticed, and you are in one of the fangs, Chad. We've heard stories, we've heard stories where there is a certain kind of like cutthroatiness, ruthlessness, maybe. I don't know if there's better words for it in certain kind of American companies. And it's apparent in just the way like the competitiveness is more apparent. More apparent doesn't mean we're not competitive. Maybe we just hide it better. But yeah, I felt like that was a very interesting question. Yeah, but I mean, keen to get your thoughts, Chris, on this because that's just my take.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a cultural difference in terms of the boldness and the confidence of talking your own book. I think like that's something I admire of people in the US, their ability to sort of own and be just completely unashamed about their strengths. And Australians really struggle with that. I think Australians don't want to come across as overconfident or arrogant. And we have this culture in Australia, Chad, if you're not aware, there's this tall poppy syndrome where you know, anyone who sort of stands out might be brought back to the group, so to speak. And it's very sort of subconscious, I think, and maybe part of our history as a colony. But yeah, I mean, without getting into all of that, I think there's a difference. But I think about one of the hires we had at Harness, and we had a few hundred applications for a role, and this individual um, messaged me directly on LinkedIn straight after sending the application, and I really loved what they said in their message. And it was bold, it was confident about their abilities and what they could bring to the role, and it was like a no-brainer to interview them. And I just think it really works if you do it in an integrity with integrity. You don't, it doesn't come across as an expectation or that this company owes you something, but with humbleness, but directness and confidence and knowing your abilities. I think that's just really attractive in all parts of life, not just a work context, right? So yeah, that would be my perspective. Chad, what do you think?
yeah. I mean, I could just sum it up. I mean, show that you care. I mean, we don't like assholes either, right? No one likes an asshole, right? So that is no one wants to work with an asshole, even in the US, right? So but the key thing is when I say relentless, like be relentless because you care, like you want to work there, right? You know, you're not saying you're the best thing since sliced bread, right? But you're saying, hey, dude, I really, really want to be here. Like I feel like I can add a lot of value. It's really, you know, it's something I'm really passionate about, and show that you care. And I think that's what's gonna make a differentiate you, right? Whereas some people are just like, I just want to get a job, you know.
Yeah.
But this is your career, right? This is your career. It's like for me, like I care, you know, and I'm when I applying for jobs and I'm looking for a job, I'm like I really want if I want to work for a company, I really really want to work there, you know. And don't get me wrong, there's been times where I've been turned down and I got heartbroken a little bit because I spent a lot of time being relentless. But then I just picked myself back up and said, oh, it's okay. I'm going to look for another company I would love to work for, right? And so that's what I mean by relentlessness. Please don't be mean. Don't be be nice. Show that you care, and then you want to do your best and put your best foot forward. That's what matters the most.
Great.
To add what
Just
Chad
don't
just said there,
just don't like do one. See, I see a lot of people. Sorry, Warner. There's just some people that I see that just kind of like, yeah, I applied once. It's all good.
Yeah.
Oh, then you obviously don't care, right? I mean, in my head, like you don't care. Why don't you go after the opportunity? That doesn't mean you're cocky or arrogant or like that stuff. It just means that you really care about doing the job. You want to get a job there, right? And that's kind of what I mean by that.
yeah, to add to Chad's point, remember I was speaking to that girl we hired who worked in the mines for 10 years. What I forgot to mention was that was actually the second time she applied because the first time it just happened to not be a role available. So she tried again. Actually, no, kind of tried 3 times actually. So there was that relentlessness. And obviously you could see, like to Chad's point, she cared. She really actually wanted to work for us and actually listed the reasons why. And she was very clear about it. And that comes across very clearly to a hiring manager or to someone who's hiring compared to someone who just wants a job. It's like day and night. It's like you can just
Yeah,
see that so clearly. And yeah, the person who just wants a job might have a year more experience than the other person, but we're not going to hire them because this person's just here to get a paycheck. Whereas the other person, they actually want to work for you. That makes a huge difference to a hiring manager. Okay, like so don't forget that point. That it's like when you're kind of like out in the field trying to apply for these roles. I know you're probably sending lots of CVs out there, but that comes across on a cover letter or on a resume or even just to an email. To Chris's point, the person who emailed it must have obviously made an impact. That stuff actually matters. So don't forget about all that stuff on top of your portfolios and CVs. There's all these other things you can do.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That's great. I want to address a couple of questions that have come up just about our harness projects, the harness courses. And one here is just asking regarding our harness projects. When a client comes to partner with you, do they provide a reason why they want to do the UX change, some data, the why behind the real reason, why they would need this improvement? Do they provide previous research on what demonstrate the need to make this investment? Okay, so I can give you a little bit more context on the process that we go through in finding these projects because I think it's worth speaking about. It's super unique and it is a lot of effort on our part. We've sort of built our company around this is the first step that we take before we even launch a cohort for students. So we spend a lot of time speaking to a whole range of companies all over the US and Australia, and some international from time to time. And we effectively approach it just like a UX consultant would approach, understanding the business requirements of a company's UX design challenges. So we learn about, what's the profile of their company, what's the service or product that they offer, who is their target audience, and what is the design, either UX research or UX design goal that they have, and how does that link back to their business objectives? And through that conversation, we write a reverse brief for the company that they can sort of review and approve. And these are challenges that these companies are working on. These are not synthetic. There's another question further down the list about whether we ever run the same project twice, and we never have in 7 years. So every time we've run a cohort, and we do nearly 8 cohorts a year across 2 countries, every single project has been unique. And I think that's what makes this so different to just bring your own project type of boot camp. It's not, we don't do that. And we've really spent the time to try and change that because, and I'll tell you the history and the reason why. I was a hiring manager as a head of digital at a large education multinational before I started Harness with my co-founder. And I was getting cookie cutter portfolios from the UX designers that I was hiring every time and time again. And these were all, I won't say the competitor name, but one of the competitors that are still around today, cookie cuttering the same project, the same portfolio. And I remember feeling like it was very difficult for me to tell the difference in their capabilities because they all had followed the same methodology. They even had some of the same research outcomes, insights. It was, yeah, so it took more time to identify the good candidates. So when we started Harness, we said, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to have unique projects. Those projects are going to be something that a student can really sink their teeth into. They're going to meet that client. And to your point in those questions, some projects research is provided if it's a design focused project. For some of the projects we run, we do the research as well. And so, for example, in our career launcher course, we have 3 different types of UX projects. There's a fundamentals where we do research and design. There's an advanced research project where we just do research in a really in-depth way with the deliverable being a formal research report. And the final project is an advanced UI design project. So to really take your Figma skills to the next level. And that UI design project, usually we have research that is provided to that cohort of students so that they're not just designing for, out of off a whim. And sometimes that research is from projects that a previous cohort of ours have done for that company. So we have, over the years, really perfected an approach to ensure that we're doing live projects for companies and getting our students a very unique set of experiences. So I hope that I haven't really gone into that level of detail in these webinars before, but I think it's useful to know because there are just so many people out there looking to get some sort of experience that sets them apart. And, this is not just about something that you can show in a portfolio. It's about what happens when you get into that job interview, right? The portfolio is the first step. The portfolio gets you the interview. And then when you're in the interview, they're going to ask you, tell me about a design project that you worked on. And if it's something that is just your own project or synthetic or the same that 100 other people have done, you're not going to stand apart. You're going to struggle to communicate your difference. But if it's a project that was unique, that had some nuanced challenges that you had to overcome, you can speak to that. And there's an authenticity that comes through when you speak about a design challenge that you had to overcome yourself. And obviously, to ensure that our students are not doing that on their own, you've got people like Warner and Chad to guide you through those projects. So enough said about our course, but I just wanted to give you a bit more context and hopefully that helps. Cool. So we've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to try and jump to questions that haven't been asked yet. And this is an interesting one, just around, does free work diminish value, or is it a necessary path in a currently oversaturated market? Interested to hear your thoughts on this, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I come from architecture where we do free work all the time. It's traumatizing, and it's not something I definitely agree with. However, I think in this context, I think it's actually something that you do want to kind of like take advantage of. First of all, I did mention it's always advantageous to kind of, to add to your portfolio, do some pro bono work, reach out to some nonprofits or even like a mate who's doing a startup. Do you charge for that or not? It's a very personal decision. You can, but I just feel like it's going to limit your kind of like the non-profit or the your startup friend saying yes, simply because, well, think about it, you have no experience. You're doing this because you're trying to get experience. So in a way, you are getting something out of it in that you can add this case study to your portfolio, and then they're getting something out of it by getting some kind of free consultation, albeit from not from an like an expert level, because you're not at that level yet. You don't have the experience, but at least they're getting like a pair of eyes who can kind of like analyze the UX issues in their website. Personally, I've, in my early days, I never charged for doing that kind of work because I knew what level I was. In my mind, I didn't kind of have that right to kind of charge a fee because I'm really doing it for something. I'm getting something out of it too. And they are too. It's like, that's usually the best situation. It's like you get something, I get something. Obviously, it's different once you got some experience in actually doing freelance work, definitely charge for that. But in these very early stages where the intention is to build up your portfolio, I feel like that is already kind of like the payment in itself, because they are in a way taking a chance on, like they don't have to use the work that you recommend, but they are taking, giving you that opportunity to help, look at my website. Can you help me kind of like improve it? So that's my personal opinion. Like I said, it's a very personal opinion. If you feel like, your time has to be charged no matter what, go ahead. It's just that you might get a lot more kind of knockbacks and people go, oh, really? No, I gotta pay for it. No, thank you. I'm just gonna go about my day. But that's just my opinion. So keen to hear Chad's thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with 100%. You don't have to do free work. You don't have to, right? But the whole point of it is for you to get the experience, right? Because if you I mean, yes, education, you're going to get the project real world experience through Harness, right? And hopefully through Harness, when you do those three projects that's going to give you a good amount of stuff to put in your portfolio to actually get a paying job, right? And if you wanted to, you could also do the free work to continue practicing, right? So if any chance you didn't go with Harness, free work is going to give you the experience that you need to be able to show that you can actually do the job, right? Otherwise, how else are you going to show it? Like if you don't do the work, how can you show you can do the work, right? It's as simple as that, right? So, to go to that hustle mentality, I mean, if you really want to get the job, I mean, yeah, do harness projects and man, take what you learn from harness and do an extra project. Or you know what, maybe not. Maybe just take your time and focus on applying for jobs because you might feel comfortable that you already know how to do UX design because harness helped teach you, and now you can start applying that and providing value to companies. So, it's your choice, up to you. But if it was me, I would do it just to get the experience. I mean, essentially, sometimes I think internships are mostly free. I don't know if I'm right on that. I could be wrong. Maybe they pay you, but internships are also kind of like free work, but you're embedded inside of a company. So
And I think just be careful with the word free when you're at that stage because it's not really free, right? As the guys have said, you're getting something back. It's just not monetary.
yeah,
And you're only doing it for that reason. You're not doing it out of charity. It's because you need to get some experience. And look, the other thing that can come from something like volunteer work is you may actually get noticed by the people that you're working with at that company. And if a role does become available, you've already established that relationship. Relationships are so important. Any ways you can create connections with people so they remember your name when a role comes up or someone in their network is hiring. You never know what's around the next corner. Guys, just on age range, I think a few questions came up around, what are sort of the typical age range of people in the UX UI space? Is it something to be concerned about? Love to get your thoughts. Chad.
I'm old, older than probably most. I've seen ranges from, man, 20s all the way up to 60. Literally, I'm in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, and to be
I
honest,
don't think
like
it
from what
matters.
yeah, it doesn't matter. Like I was gonna say, from what I've observed, in tech anyway, like there's not that age discrimination you may see in some other kind of industries. I honestly have not seen that. If you can do the work, that's all they care about.
Yep.
So like no one asks your age, there isn't even a sense of age discrimination. For example, like Canva, it's a generally much younger company, but with much older, more senior kind of staff as well. There's none of that, and even outside of Canva, from the other places I've worked, never experienced it once. So I just don't feel like it's a thing in tech. I know in other industries, this ageism thing definitely occurs, but not from what I've observed. As long as you do the work.
Thanks, guys. Just on UX research, I think there were a few questions around, is it the right move to move into UX research as a first step? Obviously, you're a UX researcher, Warner. How does that fit into sort of planning out your career path?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. UX researchers, generally, it's something that you more fall into once you start as a UX designer. It's typically not, first of all, like there's not a lot of junior UX researcher roles out there. First of all, if it's a researcher role, generally they expect there is some level of competency, and the reason being is that most of them have kind of like jumped in either straight from like a psychology academic background, and that's one of the few where you can kind of jump straight from academia to a UX research role. But that's one of the rare few. A lot of researchers I know started off as a UX designer like myself and did the research as a UX designer, if that makes sense. So I got all my UX kind of research experience, not as a UX researcher in that kind of capacity, but in a capacity as a UX designer. And that's where you actually gather the experience to go, okay. And then it's a great way for you to see if you like it. Why do you have to make that call to go, oh, do I have to be a researcher or a UI designer? You don't have to make that call at the start of your career, which is a great thing about like a product designer role or like a UX designer role, because you get exposed to every single facet of that end-to-end design process. And then you can then start specializing what your T is. We all got taught it's like you're gonna have a T. You got to be broad, across all the different, like end-to-end aspect of design. And then you're going to pick your T, where you're going to specialize in. And I happen to really love the research aspect. So I decided to kind of like pursue that path. Other people pursue different paths. I've seen UX designers transition into a product manager role, or just a specifically UI designer role. It depends what you like. So having that starting out in the UX designer role makes a lot more sense because you get all that foundational kind of like knowledge and exposure to the whole end-to-end process before you make that dive into a specialization. And actually, I would advise you do it that way because you don't start out off in a specialization and then work your way backwards. You have to have the foundational knowledge. So that would be my take on whether you want to kind of jump into UX research. You'd want to actually have that experience in UX design first before you even have an idea of if you want to do that or not, I feel.
Awesome. Thanks, Warner. Look, one last question. I'm going to let you both go. This is just around the places that you work. There's a few questions just around what is the design culture like at Amazon, at Canva? Love to just, for those who have been interested in wanting to work at those places, what can they expect?
Yeah. The Amazon, there's a lot of designers at Amazon. Yeah, there's a lot, and there's a lot of researchers, there's a lot of writers, thousands and thousands and thousands. I think for the culture, it depends. It depends on the different team, right? So the team I work on is a pretty mature UX team, and so we dive deeper and understand more about the craft. And so forth. So we have a more complete culture, right? Where at least within the side of the UX space, it's respected. Um, but then there's other spaces inside of Amazon that are just engineers, right? And they got a single UX designer, so then you're just a UX designer of one, right? But there's a global community at Amazon for UX researchers, like literally global, Australia, you name it, any country, and you can reach out to any UX designer to kind of pick their brain and learn about it. But the culture, to me, it's been great. I love Amazon. Um, and I've been at other companies as well, and there's it's a different slices, but Amazon overall I think is um, it's good. We definitely hire the best, that's for sure. Some really really good designers in this organization.
Okay. In terms of Canva, some similarities to Amazon. We're nowhere near as big, obviously. Canva is getting sizable, but it's nowhere near to the scale of Amazon. So we've got about 5,000 staff, and half of that occurred in the last 12 months. So they're kind of in that kind of like teething phase where they've kind of jumped from, it's like a very big startup to a large scale up, and now they kind of like, made another big jump. So obviously there are the obvious teething issues. But in saying that, it's the cultures. I think Canva's quite famous in Australia anyway, in terms of its very open and very flexible working culture. So from a cultural perspective, as just someone working in Canva, I personally love it. There's a lot of flexibility and there's a lot of empathy across the company, and I think that comes from the top down, simply because it hasn't IPO'd. The founders are still very much across a lot of things that happen at the company, and so that culture really kind of seeps down straight from the top leadership, and that's very apparent. It still has that kind of playfulness about them. It's a very useful kind of culture. But then with that usefulness comes a little bit of kind of like, it's very fast. So, things move very rapidly. It's not going to be like working at government where, things are just plodding along. So if you like to see things happen, Canva's a great place to be. But with that comes the natural kind of like, chaos that comes with shipping things very quickly. So, things happen all the time. We're always shipping out something and sometimes you lose track. But that's also one of the great things about it, is that if you work at Canva, you will be shipping and delivering on actual things that are being shipped to customers pretty much all the time. In terms of the design culture there, I mean, I'm a researcher, so that's considered a specialty inside Canva. So it's kind of like we're across like certain different teams, and then there'll be researchers allocated to different teams, I think similar to Amazon. And the designers are pretty much embedded within a particular team. So there'll be the company kind of like product is being carved into little sections, and each of them will have their engineering teams, their content design, their research, and as well as their product designers. They call them product designers, they're not UX designers. In terms of, I guess, the quality of the designers, it is very high bar. So Canva doesn't really hire junior roles. They have internships, but they're not going to be hiring junior to intermediate. Pretty much most engineers, designers, and whatnot that they hire are going to be of that senior level. So they hit the ground running essentially. So that's the expectation. And like, because the expectation is quite high, like we'd like to say we hire at least the best from Australia, but we are quite global. So like we got offices around the globe, but obviously the main headquarters are based in Australia. But the advantage is, like it's a fully remote kind of working environment, which is a great flexibility offered to everyone. And like they really put effort into kind of like the cultural aspects. So like even just recently, last week, we had our entire kind of group of like 600 people get together in the Sydney office, so we can have a whole week of just like face-to-face interactions, group activities, on top of like group workshops and stuff like that. So they really do make an effort, conscious effort, to kind of get everyone together and still retain that original culture that they were famous for back when they started 10 years ago. But overall, I feel like it's a fantastic place to work. So yeah, that would be my take on Canva.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate all your answers to these questions. We are out of time, and I'm conscious that we have a few questions left. So what I'm going to do is try to get these answered offline for those of you who haven't had your questions answered, but I do ask you just to put your email address in the chat so I can send you the answers. Otherwise, I won't be able to do that. But yeah, I want to say a big thank you to Warner and Chad for their presentations and for taking the time out to answer all these questions. We really hope it was helpful and that you can take something away from this webinar to help your careers and your journey into UX UI design. I'll stay online for another few minutes just to capture any emails for people who want written responses to their questions, and we'll get to them. But for now, goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, folks.